Should we invest more in sales, or put more into marketing, or put more into customer success? We've only got a certain amount of money. If you're hitting 10 out of 10, perhaps actually what that's indicating is you're spending too much money on customer satisfaction.
Possibly.
It's one thing for me to be satisfied with you. There's another thing for me to be so satisfied that I'd actually put my name to your product.
Welcome back to the Scale Tail podcast, the show that dives deep into the world of customer success. I'm your host, Mosmi Ambasta, and I'm thrilled to be here for our 10th episode. Today, we have an exciting topic lined up that will undoubtedly spark your interest. We're going to dive deep into the world of customer success metrics. What are the key customer success metrics? What is their significance? And how should you start tracking them? And to discuss this, we have with us Rick Adams. Rick has done it all in customer success. Rick is the founder and CEO of Practical CSM, an organization that provides consultancy, training, and certification services for customer success professionals to help them become more productive and more effective in their roles. Been through your webinars and really enjoy the concepts and the way you explain them in an extremely simple way. What I would really like to know is, what does Practical CSM do? I mean, so much of experience and so much of knowledge sharing that you've done over the years, and 150,000 unique learning experiences. That's amazing. So tell us a little bit about the program. I think that is something which is very valuable. It's available for people, and that might be something people might be interested in as well.
Yeah, for sure. Well, if you're perhaps on a very tight budget and you are responsible for your own training and want to progress your own career, then LinkedIn Learning is, of course, very good for that. It's a low-cost entry into getting trained in whatever topic you might be interested in. And we approached LinkedIn Learning about 4 years ago and asked them if they'd be interested, and they said yes. So we gave them some of our content. They host that, and if you're a member of the LinkedIn Learning system, then you get access to it. So Practical CSM itself offers training for teams. So if you're a company and you're looking to get your customer success management team trained and qualified and certified, well, then we have a more robust, thorough, and higher quality training range of portfolio of training products, focusing mostly on online self-study, but we do have some face-to-face stuff as well. So if you want to get qualified and certified, come and talk to us at practicalcsm.com.
Wonderful, Rick. And I must say to all the listeners around here, do check out the program on LinkedIn Learning. And of course, if you are an advanced company, reach out to Rick. And let's get into what we wanted to discuss. Thank you very much for an understanding of the programs that you do. So when we discussed about CSF metrics, I wanted to understand from your point of view. Of course, everybody understands we should measure, otherwise nothing works. But what is your point of view from CS perspective, metrics, what is going on around, what's not being measured and what needs to be measured?
Well, in the world of customer success management, customer success manager is primarily responsible for making customers successful. And what that means, of course, is making sure that customers get value from whatever they've purchased from your company, your products and your services. And to do that requires measurement, because you can't tell whether they're getting value from it unless you're measuring something. So that is measuring customer value. And that is one aspect. And it is actually one aspect that customer success managers often really struggle to do well. Got to choose the metrics that make sense based upon what your client is trying to achieve. So, for example, if they are trying to achieve an increase in quality, or if they want to get closer to the customer and understand the customer better, or if they want to sell more of a particular product range or break into a new region, or if they want to reduce their energy costs, or if they want to, who knows, it could be anything, right? Well, obviously, for them to get value, it means they've got to get that thing or more of that thing.
Yes,
and so
yes.
that you then need to consider, okay, so what do I need to measure to show that we're on a path to the achievement of their actual outcomes of their goals. So that's one aspect of measurement. Sorry, did you want to come in?
Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Well, then the other aspect of measurement is the measurement of ourselves as customer success manager. So that is turning the table the other way and looking at ourselves rather than at the client and saying, okay, so we need to measure ourselves to see what the results for our company are of the actions that we're taking and the efforts that we're putting in. Because, of course, customer success management costs a fair amount of money for a company to run. You've got to employ people, you've got the software, you've got the management time and so on and so forth. And mostly, obviously, it's the employment costs. And so we need a return on investment for that. So again, same thing. We're now, instead of saying, well, we need to measure the value for the customer, we need to measure the value for our own company. What value does the company get from its customer success operations? Which again means we've got to understand what we're trying to achieve, right? Which would tend to be things like, sorry, go ahead.
This is often misunderstood because when we talk about metrics, it becomes an umbrella thing. And the way you're trying to structure and you're explaining to us is there are metrics for your team and there are metrics for your customers. And we need to understand both of them separately.
You do, because there's no point in reporting back to the client that our retention rate has increased, because they really don't care.
Obviously.
Well, maybe they will. I mean, maybe they're pleasantly happy for us, right? But it's not of prime importance to them. What's important to them is, as we've said, am I selling more because I'm using your product? Am I bringing my products to market more quickly because I'm using your service? That's the type of thing that they want to be measured on, not how we are delivering value to our company. Okay, but the CFO of our company wants to know, should I continue to invest in customer success management? So he or she needs those answers. And so we need, as well as to measure what value the client is getting, we need to measure what value we are getting. And to do that, there are a range of sort of standard metrics that most customer success organizations, almost mature customer success organizations will know and recognize and will be using. And we can go through those if you would like.
Yes, that is something I would really like. And I would really like to say is that, nowadays when I talk to a lot of CSATs, they are often discussing that we find it hard to convince our bosses that we need something to control, manage, track our own jobs. Now, the first step to reach there is to start tracking your metrics. Once you track your metrics, you are able to go to an ROI calculation, and then you can pitch to your CFO exactly the way you will pitch to your customer if you are pitching your product. So I would really like to go deep into focusing more internal inside a business of how a customer success team needs to track metrics. And, metrics formulas are far and available, but the nuances that often get missed. And I think you would be able to touch on those nuances amazingly. So really,
do my best.
Let's go ahead, sir. Let's go ahead.
All right, well, let's go ahead, Malsmith. That's right. Let me just share my screen. And
absolutely.
A few
so, ladies and gentlemen, Rick has been really kind to share his research, his work of these years with some slides and getting deep into the metrical understanding.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, Rick.
Okay, lovely. So this is taken from some of my training, and we're going to look at a variety of ways of measuring customer success. And I think the first rule about management actually is you cannot manage what you don't measure. And that's a quote from somebody called Peter Drucker, who's famous business consultant in the 70s. And it was true in the 70s, and it's equally true today. Okay, you cannot manage what you don't measure. So in other words, if you don't know what's happening, then you can't make good quality management decisions. Well, that makes sense. So some of these might be for our own purposes inside the CS team to make good quality decisions about, should we do more of this or less of that? For example, some of it might actually then go, as you were suggesting, to senior leadership above any particular part of the organization, who also then need to make their strategic decisions. Should we invest more in sales, or put more into marketing, or put more into customer success? We've only got a certain amount of money. We've got to spend it wisely. So how do we divide up our the asset that is cash, and make sure we get the most from it? So they need these answers as well. So that's where this information is going to. So let's just take a look at what we've got here then. And here's some of the more commonly used ways of measuring and reporting on customer success management. So we'll go through the list. Let's start with customer satisfaction, which has been popular for many years.
Yeah.
And I'm sure most of us are familiar, probably with doing this as a customer, as well perhaps as working with one's own customers to do it. It tends to be something like a score. It could be rate me out of 5, rate me out of 10, rate me out of 100. It could be rate me for multiple different things that I do, or just give me an overall score. There are lots of different ways of doing it. But anyway, it's a CSAT, customer satisfaction. The higher the number, the more satisfied they're saying. So if they say, I'm going to rate you a 10 out of 10, they're saying they're very satisfied with us. If they're rating us a 3 out of 10, they're saying they're pretty
not so. Yeah.
Right. So that's the idea. To do this is what's described usually as a quantitative survey. Only a few data points doesn't tell you a lot. So if you've only got 5 customers, and you're not really going to get a lot of detail out of 5 numbers that come back. I mean, that all 5 come back in the first place, which is unlikely in the first place. So you may only end up with one person rating you as a 7, one as a 9, and one as a 6, or one as an 8, and that's whatever you've got. It's fine. What you really need is several hundred, if not several thousand data points coming back, and then you can do an average, and that average becomes meaningful because it actually stands for a wider group, where that grumpy person who got out of bed the wrong side that day and gave you a low score because of what's happening in their life, compared to the person who had a wonderful evening and got floating out of bed, wonderful, everything fantastic, and gave you an overly generous score. That it averages out because you've got enough data points. So you want to survey once you've got sufficient numbers of customers for it to be meaningful, to do this type of quantitative survey. But it's very good for quantities because you're only asking them, really, generally speaking, to just very quickly pick a number and then send me that number back. 8 out of 10, or 95 out of 100, or 4 out of 5.
No, whatever. Yes.
So you can get lots of information back, but it is very basic information. But what's really useful about it is not so much doing it one-off, Mouseme, but doing it on a regular basis. Because if you then did this every, let's say, 6 months or 12 months, well, then, of course, over a pattern of 3, 4, or 5 years, you're going to build up maybe sort of 6 to 10 or 20 even data points. And what you can then do is you can look, of course, not just at any one data point, but you can look at the direction of travel. And for example, maybe it was an 8.1 2 years ago, and then a year ago it was an 8.5 on average, and now it's 8.9. So what we're seeing is we're seeing a gradual improvement in our overall CSAT score, showing that we're going in the right direction. The things we are doing to try and make customers more satisfied would appear to be working. And if the reverse was true, then of course that tells us that things are not working. And obviously that's even more important to learn.
Correct.
And of course we could extend that into the future by sort of extending the line and saying, well, look, if this pattern continues over the next 5 years, we'll end up at a 9.5. Okay, so that could then be our target. And then we could start to have meaningful targets into the future that are based upon what we know can be achieved, because we've projected that from data points that are actually known in the previous history. So that's our CSAT. This is an example of exactly that, where we're tracking over a period of time. It went up, it went down. Now we sort of in 2016 took it seriously and said, okay, now we're gonna make sure. And what we can do then is we can take those last that last trend line and extend it forwards. If we imagine we were back in 2017 when I did this slide, then when we extend this forwards, we can see into the future when we're going to hit our 10 out of 10 is going to be maybe mid 2024. So and that's assuming that we can make the same or similar amount of progress year on year. But is that realistic, Mouseme? Because I'd say it isn't.
No, it gets harder as it gets higher, right?
It really does,
exactly,
doesn't it?
Yeah. It's exactly like revenue growth, right? With the small revenue, you grow 100, 200, 300%. But it's much harder later on.
Yeah, that would
very
require
hard.
every single customer to say 10. Now, what are the chances of every customer saying 10? Even if one gives you a 9, that's it. You haven't hit 10.
It. Yes,
okay?
Yes.
So it's very, very hard to hit 10 out of 10, if not, frankly, impossible, or even maybe unnecessary. If you're hitting 10 out of 10, perhaps actually what that's indicating is you're spending too much money on customer satisfaction.
Possibly.
You could be spending that more wisely on maybe some general marketing to get more customers, because actually 10 out of 10 isn't necessary for keeping customers. 9 out of 10 sounds very sensible. Yes. So actually, maybe this is unrealistic, and maybe what we need to think about is, in fact, it's going to be more of a curve. And in fact, probably by 2024, we are only going to be at the 9.5. We're not going to be at the 10, because as you say, as we move forwards, it becomes relatively difficult to make the same amount of change. And so we need to have realistic built-in outcomes and milestones that are more likely to be achievable, rather than just go ahead and draw a straight line and just assume that we can hit it.
So what we're saying, Rick, is do not look at CSAT for single customer or a very small number of customer. It will not make sense.
But it's not going to give you as much data, it's not as reliable.
Yes. So always look at CSAT with a reasonable size of customer chunk, and not just one CSAT survey, but multiple over a period of time. And that trend line is actually what will really tell you if it is happening, or if whatever you're doing is making some change in the progress. Otherwise, one-time survey or a one-study number, like today I did a survey with my customers and I got 8, that tells me nothing. Is it better? Is it worse? It doesn't tell a picture.
But it gives you a picture of what's happening right now.
Correct.
But it doesn't give you any context of how that is changing over time. So it's still useful, but not as useful.
And also it's better to have a trend which helps you plan for future as to what is it that you need to do. And then, of course, you can do deep dive into numbers and data and feedback and other things.
Right.
One more question, Ray. Now, most companies, generally people who come to listen to our podcast are startups. So people who are in their early first 5 years of their journey, let's say 5-6 years. Right. So for them, the mass of customers would be starting, let's say around 50. They can start with CSATs and which could be arranged. They could start early, but tracking around a 40-50 starts giving them a better value in terms of CSAT data.
Yes.
How often should they be doing it? Because at times this is done for specific instances of tasks, and at times it needs to be done overall across the business. Like, how was the onboarding? How was the experience of QBR? Blah, 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 with many things. So, how much to do so you don't end up making, customers really irritated with the surveys?
Well, this is it. So what you don't want is like customer weariness. Another request for more information from this supplier, because obviously we are here to help the customer. It's not the other way around. The customer's not here to help us.
Of course.
They don't mind doing that a little bit, and this is goodwill. So we need to maintain that goodwill by not asking for too many favors. This is effectively a favor. We've done all we can for you. Would you mind filling out this form. So we need to make it so that it's not wearying for our clients. You've got to decide what that means for your clients, given the relationships you have with them and how much they're buying from you, how often they're buying from you, and what would be appropriate. It's different if you perhaps sell one large thing every 2 years to a client compared to selling multiple things every month to that client. It depends if the client is spending $1 million revenue per annum with you, or $20 per annum revenue with. So you've got to use a little bit of common sense here, or if you're not sure, then get some expertise, because there's plenty who are trained and qualified in literally just in customer surveying. That is what they do. So you can get that get that help if you need to. So it really is horses for courses. You need to decide what is right. But let's say that if you've only got 50 clients, then you might just be asking them an overall CSAT. Whereas if you've got 20,000 clients, well, then you have the ability to maybe just go to a subset of those and ask them about a certain part of your service. So, what was the onboarding like? And then go to another part, another subset, to ask them about, the training we provided. Was that, what did you think of that part of it, and so on. So because you've got that luxury of still having enough people to go to, even in a subset, whereas of course if you have only got 50, you haven't got that sort of luxury. So again, the more clients you have, the more versatile you can be about what you want to ask, and you can start to divide up and ask different questions from different clients. And by the way, the CSAT also is a fantastic quantitative start point for more detailed investigation, which is the qualitative research, which you can't do to all 20,000 of your clients.
Of course.
Clients, but you could get 10 of them in a room over a course of a day and ask them much more in-depth questions. Ask for them to volunteer, and maybe reward them, remunerate them for their time, and reward them with something for their time. But maybe you first of all do the CSAT, and what you're looking for are the ones who aren't that happy with you. So you can then say, well, look, you've indicated you're a 5. Would you mind coming in and telling us why? And then you get more detail about the why from that small subset. So it's got to be a small subset, because you haven't got time to do everybody. But at the same time, it needs to be representative of the 5s. So you need enough. So it's not just one person and their opinion. It's actually 10 or 12 or whatever you're going to do in a room, answering these questions, maybe, or being workshopping together and discussing the questions and coming up with an overall sort of focus group type response to the questions you're asking. And that, of course, is very, very powerful. But that is for later on. That isn't something I would recommend as a startup gets involved. So shall we move on?
Yes, absolutely. I think we have. Yes.
So, of course, one of the things that, particularly with a SaaS company, software as a service, is really, really important is the churn rate or the renewal rate. Either is applicable, and one is effectively the reverse or the opposite of the other. So the standard sort of churn rate is discussing how many clients are we losing each year because they did not renew their contract. I say each year, of course, I'm saying a year, but it could be any contract period. So this works whether you have a monthly or a 6-monthly or an annual or biannual or every 5 years. It's all the same. It's just per period, the period being the period of your contract.
Of course.
So if we think about it as annual, then let's do that, because it's nice and easy. So we've got an example here where, let's say we signed up 100 customers to our service last year. So we've got 100 customers, and only 80 of them decide to renew. But the good news is we actually in that year also signed up another 30. So we've lost 20, we've got 30, we've got 110 customers, which is great. But so what's our churn rate? Well, our churn rate ignores any net new customers. It just looks at comparing from the customers we had last year, how many do we still have this year? And of course, the answer there is, well, we had 100 and now we've got 80. So the churn is the balance, which is the 20. So it's in this instance 20%. So churn is 20%, renewal is 80%. The fact that we got 30 new customers, 50 new customers, 20 new customers, no new customers doesn't make any difference to our churn rate. It's just looking at the historical figure and then how many of those existing customers stayed with us or left, not how many new customers have come. So that is our churn rate, and very simple to work out, but of course also doesn't tell us a lot if it's just 1 year. But as we collect that data over 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, of course, now we can see whether the direction of travel. Are we going up or down? Are we managing to hang on to our customers more, or are they leaving us more? And that tells us a lot of information that is very, very valuable. So if we see our churn rate increasing, it was 10% and now it's 20%, that's a serious problem that needs fixing. On the other hand, if we see the reverse of that, it was 20% churn and now we're down to 10% churn, then that tells us we're doing something right.
Perfect.
So that's our churn. Yeah, go ahead.
Churn is something which is the most talked about metric in the industry, especially because I deal more with
starting point for any any organization, particularly a SaaS company, because all of what they do really is renewable contracts. But for any organization where renewable contracts are a large part of the revenues, this is really critical that we are managing this. And then again, this is the start point for what we need to do. And again, it's really just quantitative, isn't it? It's not telling us why are they leaving. Right?
Correct.
So then what we want to do is go to that 20% and again, a focus group or questionnaire with a more detailed questions. Why did you leave? So that we understand that. And again, you might need to make that worth their while, because the investment in telling, well, they don't need to tell us. They just say they do or they don't sign. We know that, but now we're actually asking them to at least fill out a form. If not, come and attend a focus group session or something. So we're going to have to reward them, and we're going to have to spend time doing it. But the value we get is a more profound understanding of why. This is only telling us what or how many.
Correct.
And that's all. All right.
Going into churn reasons, if you don't go into churn reasons of why somebody is churning, what are the reasons? Are they voluntary, involuntary, whatever the terminologies are, but to understand the core reason of churn and then be able to fix it and then monitor it in the next cycle, whatever the cycle may be, monthly, quarterly, yearly.
Or even recognize you can't fix it, in which case you need to then decide, well, what am I going to do? Am I going to pivot? Am I going to try and find a different type of client who has different problems that I can fix, because I can't fix those ones now?
Yes,
so,
because
whatever the result is very important. Sorry, Masmi, please carry on.
At times you do find out during this that you may have acquired a customer who was not the right fit for your business in the first place, and that's another very important situation which is only uncovered when you go into the exercise of going into that churn analysis, finding that qualitative. So starting with the quantitative and then deep diving into the qualitative to find out what you can actually do about it. Right. Wonderful, Rick. Let's go ahead.
Okay, so ARR, or annual recurring revenue. So this is not dissimilar to, if you like, the opposite of churn. We said renewal. So renewal in our example here is 80% renewed. Okay, but that's not telling you the revenue value of those of renewals. It's just telling you, the quantity of renewals, or the ratio of renewals between this year and last year. What we would like to know is, well, of those that renewed, how much actual revenue was that worth? Because maybe all the really big contracts stayed with us, and it's not as much as a 20% loss in terms of revenues. It's insignificant. They were just tiny contracts that we could afford to. Maybe it's the other way around. Maybe all our most significant. So maybe 50% of our revenues went out the door with 20% churn. Okay, so we need to understand not just the number of contracts won or lost, which gives us our churn ratio, but also then, what is the actual value of the recurring revenues? So to work this out, what we've got to do again is we've got to allow for the fact that both the standard subscriptions and any add-ons and upgrades that are in the renewable contract need to be allowed for in the previous year and in this year. And so we end up with a slightly complex looking equation there at the bottom of the page, the sum of recurring subscriptions in the year and the sum of recurring revenues from add-ons and upgrades in this year that are in the contract is one side of the equation, and the other side then, which we subtract from that, the lost recurring subscriptions from the previous year and the recurring revenues from add-ons and upgrades in that year that we're not going to get. So if we take a look at an example, which I've got here, it will probably make more sense. So let's say we've sold $120 million in recurring contract value and a further 50 million in add-ons and upgrades in this year. So that's our 120 plus 50 on one side. So that's obviously 170. And maybe we lost 20 million from previous contracts not renewed, and we've taken 30 million in add-ons and upgrades last year. So that's 20 plus 30, that's obviously 50. So 170 minus 50 is 120. Okay, so there we've got our ARR of 120. And by the way, an MRR is exactly the same. It's just a monthly calculation. So we can derive one from the other simply by dividing or multiplying by 12. So obviously if it's 120 million in a year, then it's 10 million per month. So our MRR is 10 million. Now, with all of that said, actually, you know, you would, if you started with your monthly revenues because you have a monthly contract, you might find more complexity in that. You might not get exactly the same figure as just a sort of a broad, blunt divide by 12, which is a fairly sort of simple way of doing it. But nevertheless, the principle is, correct and accurate to at least a point. And you can go into more depth about ARR, but that basically is helping you understand again the direction of travel, not of all that you sell, but of the contract values, of the revenues that are recurring each year. Are we gaining more recurring revenues each year, net of everything else happening, or are we getting less? So that's our ARR. So again, that's very popular too.
Yes, and this is normally always calculated by the finance teams generally. So CSM has to make sure that they have an access to that information at least, so you can track it over a period of time.
Yeah. So because of course this does mean that you need to have sight of all the contract values in order to calculate it. And as you say, that may not be the responsibility of the customer success team to do.
But it's very important that they track it, I think, and that is
totally agree. Yeah, they absolutely do. Absolutely do. Because we have an important part in customer success management of making sure that value goes up.
Correct.
So net revenue retention is, if you like, the hot one at the moment. This is what everyone is talking about. Yeah, and I think for good reason. So net revenue retention, as it says there, is the ratio now. So it's not a revenue amount; it's a ratio of revenues retained from the last period expressed as a percentage. If therefore it is a positive value, a value over 100%, then that indicates growth. So we want to see at least 100%. 100% of NRR means we did the same this year as we did last year. So we really want to see like 110, 120, 130%. That would be lovely. And if we see 130% year on year, we're doing very, very
amazing.
Well. Right. Of course, again, it doesn't have to be done annually. So I've done an example here just to make it different of calculating it monthly. Of course, you would calculate monthly if your contracts were monthly, like a service provider for telephone, for mobile phones, for example. That's a monthly contract. It's renewable every month. They don't have to keep the contract month on month, and so therefore you can do it. It's worth doing that monthly. But if your contracts are annual, just stick to annual. It would be my opinion. Anyway, so the example here, last month we had 100,000 in renewable contract revenues. That's A. We upsell from last month an additional 25k. That's B. We downgrade from last month, that's of 5k, that's C. So you imagine like some of our customers bought a bit more, that's the B. And some of our customers stayed with us, but bought less, that's the 5k. They went down a package. So maybe all of those ones were at silver. The Bs went up to gold, Cs went down
silver
to bronze. And actually the Ds, they just said, no, sorry. And they left. So the 15K, we just completely lost. So our NRR is all of those components. The last month's renewable contract revenue plus the upsells minus the downgrades minus the churn. So 100 plus 25 minus 5 minus 15. And then to get a percentage, you just divide by 100 to get a number, which in this instance, as you can see, there is 1.05, which is 105%. So we've seen there with 100K of previous revenue, and then last month, coming on from last month, upsells of 25, downgrades of 5, churn of 15. We've got a 105% NRR from the previous period.
Yeah, NRR is the hot potato for today. Everybody is talking about it. And I think more importantly, because all of this we are talking about for an existing customer. So it becomes very much in the purview of customer success. And as you said already, like highly valued companies nowadays are in the NRR range of 125 and above, 130, 135, and they have started reporting it. And that's the most interesting part of it. That's why this has become so very important for all of us.
If you're doing between 120 and 140, then you're going to be very attractive to an investor. Okay.
Yes.
So long as you've got, like $1 million or more of revenues, you've got to be at least a decent size. But from $1 million or more upwards, and if you're doing 120 to 140% NRR, then effectively you will have investors who will invest in you.
Yeah, you would have investors lined up. That's gold to be able to achieve that. Awesome. Thanks.
And I mention that because this is one of the key statistics that they will ask for. So they will want to know what your NRR is. Okay. So, good. So that's our NRR. NPS. This is more similar really to CSAT where we started. It's a measurement of customer sentiment. It's just that the sentiment is slightly different to CSAT. Well, SAT stands for satisfaction, right? So how satisfied are you with us is a good question, but it's a less onerous bar to jump over than the question we're asking the customer in Net Promoter Score, because it is a very specific question which is written there. How likely are you, the customer, to recommend us or our product to a friend or colleague? And actually, I would suggest that's a higher bar, because it's one thing for me to be satisfied with you. There's another thing for me to be so satisfied that I'd actually put my name to your product and say, hey, Masmi, I recommend, I've just bought this car. They're fantastic. Get one. They're really great. That's I've got to be more than satisfied. I've got to be pretty sure that it wasn't a fluke, that I wasn't just lucky with the product or the service. Pretty sure that you will be able to do that every time, and pretty sure that you can do it in a variety of circumstances. It's not just specifically for my unique set of requirements, but it will fit a wider range. And so therefore NPS is a really good indicator of how really your customers, what they really think about you, assuming they give any thought to their answer, of course. So you've got to bear in mind that lots of people will read that and just go 5 or 8, and they're not really thinking about it as well, which again is exactly the same reason as we said before, why with NPS and CSAT we're talking about a qualitative survey. You need enough for it to be meaningful, so that the people who are grumpy this morning, or the people who are particularly happy this morning, or the people who always give a 10, or the people who never give a 10, you've allowed for that within variation, that pool, and you've averaged it all out. So how does it work? Well, you give them the option of rating how likely they are to recommend you from 0 to 10. Those are the options. And then what you do is you consider anybody who gave a 6 or below as a detractor. So a detractor is somebody who probably is going to say, no, I don't go with them. So if I give a 2 out of 10, then quite obviously I am pretty disgusted with the quality, and there's no way, not only would I not recommend you, but I would go out of my way to tell people, no, I wouldn't. I'd try
don't use it.
even a 6. If you think about a 6 out of 10 is they were just barely, I don't want my money back, but just about they were barely acceptable. Would I buy from them again? Would I recommend buying at 6? No. Okay, so 6 and below is your detractors. 7 to 8 are passive. So they are like, if they were going to be asked by one of their friends, would you buy from Rick? And they were a 7 or an 8, they were like, well, it was fine. It's not, no, I wouldn't. It's not, yes, I would. Yeah, they're fine. I'd put it on your list to consider. I can say that, right? So they're not really they're not really going, no. They're just saying, fine. So that's 7 to 8.
They would not state their reputation and go outright and say, yeah, go for it. That won't happen.
Yeah, I mean, an 8's good. I mean, I'm generally speaking, if a client gives me an 8, I'm not unhappy about that. But I wouldn't say that they're my raving fans. But if they give me a 9 or a 10, now they are my fan, right? I mean, they're saying, if they're saying a 9, a 9 is pretty tough, and a 10 obviously is very tough and to achieve. And they're basically saying here, yes, I do think that you're above average here. You did more than what I would have expected, and you gave me more value than necessary to keep me as a customer. So therefore, if somebody says, would you recommend Rick or would you recommend Mousme, then if they've given a 9 or a 10 to us, well, then they're probably saying, yeah, I would recommend you. So they're promoters. So we could ignore the passives because they're passive, right? They're not for us or against us. They're just, you could try them. So what we do is we take the number or the percentage of our customers that are promoters, and we subtract the percentage that are detractors. If we do 100 survey 100 people, or 100 surveys come back, and 60% of them were promoters, 25% were passive, 15% are detractors. Well, the 25% are passive, don't care. Just going to focus on the 60 and the 15. So 60 minus 15 is 45. Our NPS is 45.
So what is a good NPS score, Rick?
What a great question. I'm so glad you asked me. A good NPS score is one that's going upwards. So again, it comes back to what I said before about just having one photo of right now, here's how we are, is somewhat useful, but having a pattern of, and we're going up year on year, that is very useful.
That makes sense.
So we need to see that. And the other thing is that can you really compare with others? Well, this is an interesting point, because perhaps you can actually, because it is a standard question, the wording is exactly the same, the numbers obviously don't change, it's always 0 to 10, it's always how likely are you to recommend it to a friend or colleague. Then actually there is some stats out there for various industries. So for example, here's Qualtrics did some research into consumer industries. You can see here that consumer industries range from minus 0.1 for consumer payments, that's like PayPal or things like that, up to 33% for grocery stores, or 33, I should say, just not NPS of 33. So, that, and something like a utility company comes in at around 16, or health insurance or hotels come in at sort of 17 there. So you get an idea for that. So if you run a hotel and you do your NPS score, then you can compare yourself against this. And if you got, say, an NPS of 34, well, then actually, if the average is 17.2 in your industry, you're probably doing all right. Okay. So again, useful to know.
Of course.
Similarly, this is a company called clearlyrated.com, and they did a similar thing for B2B service industries, which probably be the majority of us here on watching or listening to this. So you can see there, like IT service, I'll pick that one out. That's a 44 is the average. So you can see, if you look at the averages there, they run the smallest, I think, there's a 1 in the 20s, but they're almost all in the 30s and the 40s, right? Compared to here, where actually you can go all the way down to 0, although there are some in the, there's quite a lot in the 20s, 1 or 2 in the 30s. I would say that the average here is probably about sort of, I don't know,
20.
About 20. let's say, because remember you've got a 0 in there. Whereas here, the average has got to be at least 30, hasn't it? You even got a 60 in there. So you can see that actually the standard of NPS is much higher. And I would suggest that there's an obvious reason for that. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that, Mouseme.
But it's just feel too much to put at stake. You're asking customer to put their reputation on stake when they are referring you. So it's the journey of going towards advocacy and looking at the numbers. It looks like if you are even close to 50s, you have hit the jackpot.
Well, that's very true. But I get the point I was making. So I'll come back to that. But the point I was making is that if we look at the difference between consumer and B2B, B2B have much higher NPSs. And I think the reason is because generally speaking, each individual customer is more important to them.
Yes.
Because it's worth a lot of money.
A lot of money.
So correct. Therefore, there is a higher level of investment in customer service.
Yes.
Is that making sense? Yeah.
Absolutely. And for here, every customer becomes so much more important. You have an entire team focusing on each and every customer because the value that they bring to the business in terms of money is much more higher. So B2C businesses might have slightly lower NPS in that case, which is what we were seeing.
Be prepared to lose customers.
Some of them, yeah.
And there may be a lot more sort of movement between competitors, customers going from one to the other, and they're not so bothered. Compared here, where they retention is just absolutely critical because that's a portfolio of
correct
X millions going out the door if that client goes. So
these are all kind of high ticket size businesses, and those are all small ticket size businesses. Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
It looks average, like that. Yeah,
on average. I mean, there could be some very, very high net worth individuals here, and there could be some very small businesses here, but on average, we all know, like a business's checkbook is, it's even printed on a larger size when they used to print it, than a consumer's. So definitely a larger checkbook. Okay, good. So have we got time to do one more?
Let's cover it, Rick. I think it's very valuable. Let's not miss out on this one.
All right. So the final one that I had was the customer lifetime value, or CLV. Now, this one is perhaps a little bit harder to calculate. You need to be going a while. So this is not really possible to calculate in your first year or two, simply because you haven't had enough customers go through the entire journey of becoming your customer and staying as your customer for the duration, and then ultimately leaving you through natural wastage, as it were, or progression through that. Because you will find over time, as a mature company, that even your best customers, ultimately your business changes, their business changes, and you come together, you're in parallel, but then maybe you ultimately diverge at some stage, and it becomes a natural conclusion. Of course, what we want is that bit where we're in parallel, we're selling lots of stuff to them, whilst we want that to be as long a period as possible. Right? Because if we sell, let's say we work out per annum, we sell our client, we sell 10 million on average to every client. Well, then obviously, if we can retain our client for
as long as
2 years, that's 20 million per client more revenues for the company. And if we've got 100 clients, then that's 2,000 million. That's 2 billion, right?
That's a lot of money.
Yeah. So that's why CLV is important. Okay, so in a nutshell, so it's as it says there, it attempts to measure the total revenues attained from an average customer across the entire lifetime of the relationships. There are lots of ways of doing it. This is a really simple one I've got here. It takes your annual revenue from your customers, so and that's an average. So you take all your customers and all your revenues and divide your revenues by your customers. That's your annual average customer revenue, and multiply it by your average customer lifespan. So if your customers on average stay with you for 5 years and the average revenues is 5 million, well then 5 times 5 is 25 million. Now that is a very raw figure. Lots of things can be done to make that better. You can allow for the cost of acquisition of your client. You can allow for all sorts of other things as well, like commissions in sales and all sorts of things. So there's a lot that can be done to make that a more detailed and more profound and interesting figure that that the CFO and their finance might want to do. But the point is this: it's very, very simple. The bit that's interesting to me is how long are you retaining your clients for, and how much revenues. So we want as much revenues per annum for as many annums. And just keeping that in mind is all you need to worry about at the customer success management. And again, do we have a part in to play in that? Absolutely. That's that retention piece. And then, of course, also the upselling and cross-selling to maximize the actual per annum amount
value of it,
number of years. So both of those two figures that this is derived from, we are directly responsible for, at least partially. So there we go. So we can see there it's how you work it out: annual revenue from customer minus costs times the customer lifespan. And that costs, that's what I was indicating about things
of
like
course.
Commissions and cost of initially acquiring the customer through marketing, things like that, tends to be taken out of this particular equation.
So basically, we are calculating how much profits we will make from the customer. In simple terms, we take out the acquisition cost. So cost of acquiring the customer is taken out from revenue. So true profit that we got from the customer multiplied by number of years.
Certain aspects of only the what they would describe as direct costs are taken out.
Of course.
So indirect costs, which is going to be salaries and heating and lighting, and
that stays there.
It's not actual profits, but it is minus what they sometimes call cost of goods sold, COGS.
Yes. So we remove the COGS and then rest of it comes out of it. This is very important to highlight, which you started in the first sentence. Don't start it on day one. You would not get anything. We would be making good guesses.
You haven't had a customer for a lifetime yet.
Yes. So we don't know how long it is.
Lifetime drop off.
Yes.
Yeah.
We don't really know how long the lifetime is at this stage. So unless you find that out, I think it will just be a very intelligent guess when you say maybe my customers will stay 3 years or 5 years. So we need to go through that journey to be able to really understand what is the lifetime exactly if you have had some customers leave and have that journey for a few years or so.
If you imagine coming out the other end, if you're a startup SaaS company, SaaS owner, and you're thinking in 10 years you're going to want to sell your company, this is a metric that you would want to get your purchaser excited with. Okay, because of course this is telling them before I get out of bed, I'm pretty much guaranteed, this amount,
so much of revenue,
for this amount of years. So this is the exciting end result of all that hard work for 5 or 10 years in a SaaS or other renewable service type company, is you then have this customer lifetime value, which so long as you don't screw up, so long as everything else stays the same, it's just going to carry on. So this is that what you might call like a lagging indicator. It's the ultimate value of your company, effectively, you could argue.
Yes, but this becomes so much more important during investor discussions in the later stage, of course, B and C rounds. Earlier, of course, we just started tracking, so it's not the right time. But thank you very much. I think we have come to the end of the list that we wanted to discuss. Wonderful, Rick. People generally know these metrics. They sort of find the formula as well. It's not too hard. The parts that is missed.
It's all online. It's all on the internet, of course. Yeah.
But what gets missed is what is really important. It's not about just obsessing that I'm doing service, but what do you get the value out of it? And that value understanding becomes so much more important. And that is what we really wanted to discuss. And thank you very much for, going deep into that.
Yeah, you're right. There's a when and a why as well as a what. And that's important. So hopefully we've covered a little bit of the what and a little bit of the how. In terms of this is the calculation, but as you say, it's the when and the why that is the exciting bit to help decide. Well, which ones should we do now? Which ones should we park and do later? Which ones are going to actually tell us something useful right now? Which ones should we share with who? That sort of thing.
Thanks, Rick. Thank you very much for sharing your in-depth knowledge. I'm sure the listeners were able to learn a lot from what you shared about customer success metrics. Thank you, listeners, for joining us in today's podcast. If you would like to follow Rick on LinkedIn or get your hands on his amazing book, Practical Customer Success Management, or check out his program on LinkedIn Learning, we will provide the link in the description. Also, as we discussed earlier, Rick's organization, Practical CSM, provides consultancy, training, certification services for CS professionals and companies. So if you want to check that out, we will also provide the links in the description. And if you like this podcast, please feel free to follow and subscribe to us. We are available on all major podcast platforms, including Spotify, Apple Podcast, and YouTube. In this podcast, we shared some slides. So if you want to have a look, check out YouTube. And see you in the next episode soon. Thank you very much, Rick, for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye all.